Welcome to Passive Aggressive Income. This program may contain strong language. The content may not be suitable for audiences under the age of 17. We understand many of our listeners may not agree with all of our personal viewpoints. We in no way, shape, or form mean to be offensive to anyone. Our show notes will provide all of our source material included for each episode. Now let's get passive aggressive. Welcome back to another episode of Passive Aggressive Income. If you are here after listening to the trilogy of writing, welcome back. Lexie is going to pivot into a different direction. She's going to talk about more of the short-term rentals and things I don't know about. So I'm really excited.
Yeah, so as many of these episodes are, these topic ideas that I bring, they're inspired from the current events of my life. So
Yeah.
this week I'll discuss how I've dealt with some tenants breaking their lease and leaving early while I've been running a midterm rental. So to start, what is a midterm rental? I know that's still like not super common. Most people know what short-term rental is, like on Airbnb, and then we all know what a long-term rental is if we've been, renting a place for a year or more. A midterm rental falls kind of between those two. So for me personally, my tenants are typically here for about 2 to 4 months, and there's some leeway on either side, but that's kind of the average. And my rentals are all fully furnished and they have all of the amenities that a person would need to live in a place. The tenants that I have staying in my rentals are typically going through some sort of transition in their life. Maybe they're going through a divorce or they just moved to the area and don't have any furniture, don't want to commit somewhere yet. Maybe they're working or studying away from home temporarily. So I get a lot of summer interns and traveling nurses. Or maybe they're just on an extended vacation or a working vacation and just want to be somewhere new for a month or a couple of months at a time. So to talk about pricing typically it is sort of between the long term and the short term. Short term makes the most money, but it's the most work. Long term tenants, you don't make as much money. I mean, you still make money if you're doing it right, ideally, but you don't make as much money as like a short-term rental, and midterm sort of just like in the middle. I like to offer discounts for longer stays because turnover can be just kind of a lot and it's chaotic and it's something that I have to put time in my schedule. So I like to see tenants stay for a couple of months. So I'll typically offer like a 2 month discount, a 3 month discount. And then if they want to commit to like 4 months or something longer, they'll get a discount for that too. Even with those discounts, it between a long term and a short term, I found that it's been a happy balance for me, where I still have to deal with turnover and it's a little bit of work, but definitely not compared to my Airbnb short-term rental days. And I found that it's a pretty happy medium for what I've got going on in my life.
Right.
Something to keep in mind with midterm tenants or midterm rentals is that tenants get tenant rights after 28 days. So that means it becomes like their place of living. So if they choose not to leave and they choose not to pay you, you will have to evict them if that's the process. They get like squatters' rights essentially. But if you are running a short-term rental, you don't need or you will need a short-term rental license. But if you're running a midterm rental where your minimum night stay is 28 nights, then you don't need that additional license, at least in Minnesota.
And if you do need to go through the eviction process, we did cover an eviction episode, so make sure you
Mhm.
go all the way back and listen to that too.
Yes, so we have quite a healthy length playlist talking about real estate topics. So there's some really good information in there. So that's sort of just the overview of kind of like
Mhm.
midterm rentals. I'll go a little bit more into some like leasing things that I really suggest you have if you're running a midterm rental. But yeah, if you are interested in learning about like how the eviction process works or what are the difference between short term and midterm, we have episodes on that you should go listen to. So yeah, next I'll talk about leasing for midterm rentals because it is a little bit different. There are two ways that I typically get tenants, and one of them is through Airbnb. I still have all of my rentals listed on Airbnb, but they just have that minimum of 28 nights for a stay. And then direct bookings is the other way. So we'll talk about Airbnb first. Airbnb handles all payments. They typically should have your back when problems come up with tenants or guests, as the Airbnb platform calls them. And then you can list all of your house rules directly in the listing on Airbnb so people kind of know what they're getting themselves into before they book. And then Airbnb also allows you to charge an additional cleaning fee on the platform. So when someone goes to check out and rent your rental, then they'll see all the fees associated. And you can just say up front, this is what you'll pay to have it cleaned. And then direct bookings. I actually get a lot of my direct bookings from Airbnb. I really suggest having your rentals up on Airbnb as just a place for people to find you too. But there's Facebook groups, there's all sorts of other platforms that you can rent or that you can list your rentals. But yeah, typically Airbnb is nice because they have some of those amenities, but they also charge more. So service fees can be kind of high, and people don't always want to deal with that. So that's where direct bookings come in handy. So I have two parts of the lease that I will have the tenant sign. The first one is just a typical standard Minnesota lease. And then I'll have an additional rules document attached to that where I can put in the things that I expect of my tenants. And then they can sign that all at once. And those are the rules. That's how we handle leasing. And then we will take a deposit ourselves and we'll also enforce a cleaning fee, and we handle those payments alongside rent. So we'll usually use apartments.com where we get rent and we can have all of your different fees for the rental associated and have it scheduled out where the tenant can go look at it. But that is something you'll have to handle on your own with direct bookings compared to Airbnb.
And do you list on Facebook at all, like on Marketplace for midterm?
So I actually haven't listed on Facebook Marketplace. I'm not against it, but I've just found that I've been able to get tenants through Airbnb and through websites like Furnish Finder. And that's pretty much been keeping all of my rentals covered. If there was a really slow period, then that's definitely something I would look at is Facebook Marketplace, because I know that works really well for long-term tenants.
It does, but you kind of get bamboozled a lot, and by like people that don't even look at the descriptions.
Mhm.
The amount of times I've gotten people that messaged me on a very specific type of apartment. So it's a 55 and older
Okay.
community building. And people will still message me and they'll be like, "Is this available?" And I'm like, "Are you 55 or older?" They're like, "No." And I'm like, "Move along."
Then no.
And they'll be like, "Well, why? Why can't I do?" I'm like, "You want to live in an apartment full of senior citizens? Like, that's what you want to do?"
I
It's
mean,
so
to
weird.
each their own. It sounds like a quiet place to live, but yeah, I can see having to filter through some shit on Facebook because that's kind of usually how Facebook goes.
Oh yeah, it's like a free for all.
hmm Yeah. So speaking of free-for-alls, I'll talk about the the situation that inspired me to make this episode. Because like I said, these episodes are usually inspired by current events. So this just happened recently where I had a tenant who we had talked ahead of time, and I had actually met him like back in January when he was searching for housing in the Twin Cities. I gave him a house tour, which I typically kind of don't like to do because it feels like a bit of a waste of time for shorter term rentals like
Yeah.
what I have, because like you're only here for like a month or two. You can see pictures, you can see my reviews. Like it's not like you're signing on for a whole year. So I
Yeah.
typically don't like to do that, but January is a bit slower for midterm rentals
So
in
you make it work.
yeah, so we make it work. So yeah, I gave him this house showing and he just stacked like showing after showing after showing all throughout the day, was here for maybe like 5 or 10 minutes, him and his mom, and they like tracked snow all over my clean
Oh,
floors that I had to deal with. And then in front of me had a conversation that they're like, well, do you think this one's more worth paying this much more upfront compared to the other one? And then his mom was just like, no, just like straight up in front of me.
Oh
So
my God.
I was like, okay,
Wow.
cool, waste my time. So
So
that already,
disrespectful. Like, just do that behind their back like a normal
right?
person.
Seriously, like go outside and then text me. Come on.
Wow.
But yeah, whatever. Like that's fine. It's in the past and whatever, I get it. So he recently reached out in the last like month or so and was like, "Hey, I'm looking for housing in the Twin Cities again. Do you have your rental available?" And it it worked out so well because he like the previous tenant left and the very next day he checked in and he's like, I'm
Oh,
planning on staying for at least 2 months, maybe longer. I'm just saving for a house in this area, so like maybe I'll stay through the winter or really until I can afford a house. And I was like, okay, like longer term, like that sounds really ideal for us. And he did ask for a house tour again, and I said no because I'm like, bro, you've seen it. And
yeah. What?
yeah, and I was like, sorry, like we have a tenant in here currently. Like I like we wouldn't have someone going through your unit while you're staying here, so we're not going to do that to our current tenant. And he's like, okay, yeah, totally understand that. It's all good. And I like got a little bit of weird vibes from him just from the first time that I met him because
Right.
of that whole situation. And so I was kind of just like digging in to be like, so what happened with the place you were staying at? And he said basically, the people had some that were renting to him had some family visiting and they wanted to use his rental for their family. So I'm like, okay, like that makes sense. Cool. Um, and he's like, yeah, I want to just do 1 month. And I said, no, we have 30-day notice. So basically, like if you only plan to leave 1 month, then we would need to know that the day you moved in. So we agreed on 2 months.
Yeah.
Way he could stay for a month and then decide if he wanted to extend and do month to month after that. So he decided on 2 months. Did all of the things. He agreed to everything, signed all the paperwork, was here for 3 weeks, like a nice guy, kind of awkward, but we talked a few times. And then I got a text on a Thursday night that said I vacated the property. Like I had something unexpected to come up and I had to leave. I would like I would like out of the lease. And
Ah,
I'm like, okay, well, we did have this whole conversation about how we require 30-day notice, and that's after your term of your lease. So I'll kind of get into the details about like leasing as we break this down. But so yeah, that was the situation. He took the garage door opener. He took two keys, which actually don't like during his stay, we replaced the front door. And so we like those keys that he has are not actually useful, which is great because
yeah.
we would have had to rekey everything. So we got
Yeah.
key padlock. So that's already like two costs that he will have to pay to replace those things or send them back. And basically on this initial message, I told him, no, like you did sign this lease and we were counting on you to pay your rent. And that was the agreement. It's not like month to month right now. We agreed on a 2 month lease. And then he said he wasn't going to pay for the remaining month and a half of his lease. And then he demanded his deposit back.
Ah, oh my God. I love these people. I love
Mhm.
them so much.
It's like the audacity. So let's kind of just break this down and I'll talk about like what I have in my lease and sort of like what not to do and just some of the things that I've learned along the way. So number one, like your lease is the most important thing when it comes to a rental. So make sure that you're protecting yourself in every way possible. So first, you want to state the agreed amount of time in the lease. So don't put month to month if you have an end date. If the lease is 2 months, then write out the lease starts on this day and ends on this day. And it's the terms of the lease is 2 months.
Hmm.
Say that very directly. Because if they're month to month, and that allows them to break the lease kind of at any time, even if you did have an agreed upon start and end date. And then it often like month to month has its own whole like list of rules and allowances compared to a specific term with your lease. So make sure that's very clear. Sort of like an optional thing, but what I found when I started out doing midterm rentals was I was marketing to a lot of traveling nurses. So I gave kind of some special allowances and some discounts to healthcare professionals,
Mm.
especially if they end up coming to the Twin Cities and then their contract gets canceled. Instead of requiring them to give me a full 30 days notice, then I've said you can give me 2 weeks notice if your contract gets canceled. Just give me proof of that message in writing, and
Mm.
like we'll be willing to work with you.
Right. It's not like you're a non-understanding person or like a
Yeah.
villain or anything, but like
Mhm.
these people, I think this is what you really have to know before you get into this is that people would try to get away with anything
Yeah.
if you allow them to. And I know
Mhm.
that there's some landlords that are like, well, they left. And if I take them to court, it's like getting blood out of a turnip. It just doesn't matter. And it's like, yeah, no. Like, if you're
It
gonna
matters.
screw me over this way when we signed a binding contract,
Yeah.
it's like I didn't just say, hey, after 2 weeks, I'm sick of you being here. Get the fuck out. Like,
Yeah. Right. So like what like it's a two-way street here, you know. I'm going to respect the terms of lease so you have housing, and you should respect the terms of the lease so I can pay my mortgage because I was
mm-hmm,
counting on you because you signed this agreement.
mm-hmm.
Yeah. So yeah, alongside with sort of like the healthcare professionals having a little bit more leeway with their contracts. I mentioned this a little bit before, but like length-based discounts. So if I rent for if I have a place that's being rented for 3 months versus 1 month, they'll have very different nightly rates because they do give advantages for those who stay longer. So if a tenant breaks the lease and leaves early, you need to calculate the nightly rate without the discount to see what they
Oh,
actually owe you. And that's a mistake that I made for way too long because this had happened a couple of times where someone would break their lease and leave early. And then I'm like, man, I don't know why, but I kind of feel like I got screwed on that. And then I
mm,
realized that I was getting screwed on that because they
right.
were still getting the discount of staying for 3 months, even if they didn't actually stay that length of time. So this is where Airbnb is really nice because they'll do all of the calculations and everything for you. So if the person changes their reservation to be shorter, then they will take off that discount right off the bat. And you can always just use Airbnb as an excuse, like, oh, Airbnb must have taken off the discount. And so like that's the pricing. That's not within my control, right?
Yeah,
Airbnb is
smart.
really nice for that. But if you are booking off platform directly, then you really should be doing that on your own so you get paid fairly. And yeah, I mean it's really inconvenient to have a whole bunch of turnovers, especially if it's unexpected. And if you do have turnovers like every single month compared to every 3 to 4 months, then you're going to have a lot more risk of vacancy, which means losing money. So just make sure that those expectations are really clear and that you are protecting yourself with how much money you are getting for the nightly rate uh, based on the length of time they actually stayed. Other things to include in the lease is just verbiage about surrendering the property. So with my guy who just decided he was gonna up and leave without any sort of notice whatsoever, I have these protections in the lease, and this is actually in the standard Minnesota lease, but it is good to make note of. So just to read it verbatim, it says, duty to pay rent after eviction or surrender. Rent is due under this lease, even if the tenant surrenders the premises or is evicted by the landlord. Landlord should make good faith efforts to mitigate damages. And basically, what that means is even if you leave or you get evicted, you still have to pay what it says on this lease. You're still responsible for that lease. And
Yep.
on the landlord side, having a good faith effort to mitigate damages may include like doing your best to find new tenants and in the situation that I've been put in, I agreed that if I can find a new tenant, then I'll prorate rent. So you don't have to pay the full month. You'll just have to pay the gap where I haven't don't have a tenant staying because you were supposed to be here. And I think that's more than fair.
That is way more than fair. But I
Yeah.
mean, you kind of have to get what you get. And
Hmm.
not that you couldn't get what you could get, like if you went through the whole court system, but that's a
Yeah.
whole thing. So if you can try to get it everything squared up outside, sometimes you have to compromise like that.
Yeah. And it really is like you kind of just have to do what you can to get anything because getting something's going to be better than getting nothing.
Right. And if you have all your faith and submitting them to like a
Mhm.
collection agencies take about, I think, depending on, but it's 30 to 40%.
Yeah,
So
that's a lot.
right.
A lot.
So if you aren't going to get the full amount, even if you're like, well, we're just going to send you to
Mhm.
collections. It's like, yeah, that's going to hurt them credit wise, but half of these fuckers don't even care about that. I've
Yeah.
had people tell me straight up, like, I don't care. My credit is already 300. And I'm
Yeah, it's
like,
not going to do
how is
anything
that
for you.
possible?
Yeah, I mean, that's the sad truth is, yeah, you really just kind of have to be willing to compromise and work with the situations that are dealt to you. And it sucks when stuff like this happens, but you kind of just have to deal with it. Um, And in regards to like late payments, so I'm not sure how it is in Wisconsin, but in Minnesota, you get a 5-day window to pay rent before it's considered late. So rent is due on the first, but they have until the fifth to actually send payment. Um,
Yeah, it's
no, not the
different in
same for you.
Wisconsin. Yeah, it's from the first,
Oh,
really. So
okay.
that's how my current company does it. The other company and my own, we always do a 5-day grace period.
Mhm.
I don't know if there's really a preference that I've experienced. Like, I don't know if I prefer 5 days or one or the first because it's
Mhm.
kind of like if it's late, it's late, you know?
Yeah, I mean, I feel that too because it's like all my bills are due on the first, right? I don't get a 5-day grace period,
Very
but
true.
that's just written directly into like the standard Minnesota lease. So that's what we go with.
Oh,
But yeah, make sure that that is very clear on the lease and make sure that the tenant is aware that charges will accumulate if rent isn't paid on time. Even if they surrender the property, they still have to pay rent by the fifth. And if they don't, they will get a late fee, even if they're not staying there because they've surrendered. So make sure that's very clear.
yeah, absolutely nail them.
Mm. And then one of my last suggestions here with the lease is to include checkout instructions within the lease, just in case they decide to up and leave without giving any warning, like my tenant
Mm,
did. So that way, I usually like to still have a conversation and say, hey, make sure you do these things before you leave. But in case you don't get that opportunity, just have that written straight up in the lease. And maybe they're not going to follow those things because they're not following the whole like checkout process and they're breaking their lease anyways, but that's at least one opportunity that you can get to make the process a little bit easier on yourself.
yeah, I we do it the same way where we have the Wisconsin standard lease agreement, our addendum, which is about depends on the property. So each property has its own addendum,
Mhm.
which is I didn't ever think about that because each property requires different things.
Right.
And then we have the security deposit deductions breakdown part of the lease
Mhm.
as well. So it's like from the get, this is what it is.
Yeah, nothing's changing here. You signed it. You agreed.
Hmm. Yeah, and I have them sign all three documents. So
Mhm.
the standard lease, the addendum, and the security deposit. So it's like I am doing what I'm supposed to be doing by making sure you hit every single form. And
Yeah,
if you just breeze through and just sign and sign, that is on you, sir.
that's not my problem. You agreed.
Mm-mm,
Your
mm-mm.
signature's on there. Yep.
Yeah.
So as another suggestion, I would highly suggest putting in additional fees part with for any like lost or stolen keys and have that written in the lease too, because
Mm,
it's on you to rekey your place if someone takes the keys and doesn't return them, and that can be really costly. So make sure that that's on them and that they agree to that on the lease. How do you handle a tenant like this? A tenant who broke their lease and doesn't want to pay and is just kind of being difficult. So the first thing that I had to do myself and my husband as we were dealing with this is just kind of take a deep breath and say, hey, this really fucking sucks to deal with, but I don't know what this guy's situation is. And just try to approach them as one human being speaking to another. It can feel really personal and it will very likely make you incredibly angry to deal with this and have someone just saying like, hey, I know that we signed this agreement, but I'm not going to hold at my end. It can feel really personal, but just know that being angry at someone never got anywhere productive. It's not going to get you to where you want to be.
yeah.
So yeah, think just make sure that like you realize this is a human being. You don't know what they're going through. Let's talk as two humans. So explain that the agreement was signed and the income you were expecting was from them that you were counting on, and that them not giving you any notice didn't allow you to find a replacement tenant. So now there's these nights that you have open that you're not getting any money for and didn't really get the opportunity to get booked ahead of time.
Right.
So yeah, them not giving you notice is kind of like it's them, their responsibility causing this vacancy for you. And don't put the blame on them, but just kind of let them know that like them not paying is kind of putting you in a hard place and you still have to, pay your bills instead of just being like, yeah, because you did this and you did this, and like now I'm in a really bad place. Just keep it very like strictly objective. So what we did was we printed out a signed copy of the lease and we highlighted all the parts that pertain to the situation. And then sent that to him so he can see, oh, this part is about surrendering. This part is about how if you don't pay rent, the deposit can be used for rent. This part is about like all the things that he basically didn't want to do. And we're like, hey, you agreed to this. Here it is. These are the receipts.
Right.
And in this, like, stay objective, make sure that you're treating this person like a human, but also try to avoid you statements. This is a big
Mm,
thing in like all communication, but listen to the difference between these two sentences. You agreed to the terms when you signed the lease, so you have to pay your rent, versus the lease terms that we agreed on shows that this amount of rent is still owed.
yep.
Very different vibes. One is very blamey. It's gonna put the person on defense. They're not gonna be happy. And the other one is just objective and saying, hey, this is what we, both you and I, not just you, agreed on, and this is what's still owed. And
Hmm.
it takes a lot of emotion out of it.
Yeah.
And if all else fails, you can take them to small claims court. Even if you win, you may not ever see that money, like Mims was talking about. Maybe they don't care what happens if their rent goes to collections, but it does go on the record as a warning to future landlords, and it shows the tenant that their actions have consequences, that the documents they sign are legally binding. So, yeah, we were talking about going to small claims courts with this guy, and it would only cost us $75, which is just a fraction of the amount of money that he actually owes us.
Yeah.
And we kind of just told him, like, hey, we're willing to work with you. We want to make this fair. So we're going to do everything we can to find a tenant. We'll prorate rent based on whenever we get a new tenant in during your original lease terms, blah, blah, blah. He sent a response was just K, the single letter K. And I'm like, okay, well, that's cool. And we listed it right away. We got it cleaned, did everything we could to get a new tenant in. That was Thursday night he left. And Monday we checked in a new tenant who is paying a significant amount of money more each month and is staying for longer and
Mm,
is also booked on Airbnb, which is nice because then we get another review, and it all really honestly worked out better in this
right.
situation. And we just have to be thankful that he left and he didn't just stop paying rent and stayed here. So we didn't have to deal with all of that. Um, and I think it's just going back to like sticking with your gut feelings. And even if a deal is really good and like the dates work out
Mm,
perfectly, if a situation feels just kind of a little bit sketchy, or you get weird vibes, or maybe you had sort of an awkward encounter several months ago with this person, then just kind of listen to that and know that there's other fish in the sea.
yeah, I've had apartments vacant for 2, 3 weeks
Mhm.
because I would rather have it sit than have somebody in there that's gonna fuck me over
Mhm.
and just be and I can feel it. I can feel it when I show it, and I'm just like, mm-mm,
Mhm.
you're not asking the right questions, or maybe you're not asking any questions, or maybe you are saying stupid stuff, or maybe
Yeah.
you showed up late, or like, why do I smell like booze on you? Or just like, I
Yeah.
would rather wait for that golden ticket person that I
Mhm.
know is out there. And like, not all tenants are bad tenants, not all landlords are bad landlords. So
Yeah.
I would wait. I would rather wait, and then rather than have somebody that's gonna, like I said, fuck me over. So yeah,
Mhm. Yeah.
listen to your gut.
Yeah, I mean it's sounds kind of silly that it's like, oh, you get a feeling and now you're not gonna like take this person up on a bunch of money, but honestly, like those feelings are super valid. And that's something that I had to learn and had to learn the hard way when we started renting out our house. But yeah, every once in a while you still make mistakes, and that's just kind of how it goes. You learn along the way, but make sure that you listen to those things. Make sure that you are protecting yourself in the lease and writing everything out very clearly multiple times. And yeah, hopefully that helps and other people don't have to go through the same things. By listening to this episode, hopefully you've learned something.
And even if you do go through it, it's a pretty normal thing to go through, honestly. And
Yeah,
just to have that, like, a background of, everything that Lexie went over, that's just going to help you go through it with maybe grace that you wouldn't have before,
yeah,
or knowledge that you wouldn't have before, or maybe you're scared and you're like, oh, well, then that's it then,
right.
you're a landlord, you have rights too. Like, they have rights, you have rights too. And that contract is your Bible. Make sure that it is thorough, make sure that it is correct, because if one thing is not legal in there, it will just damage the whole thing.
Yep.
Because I mean, you can't have illegal stuff listed in there, it just voids the whole contract.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, for
make
sure. You
sure
got to do
that
your
you
research.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it's a good point. Thank you guys for listening. That was probably a bit ranty, but I think there's some good information sprinkled in there too.
No, absolutely. I think that it was perfect, and that who gives a fuck if it's ranty? I just ranted like 2 episodes in a row.
Yeah, you know what? It's our podcast.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you guys for listening, and we will see you again for another one next Monday.
Bye.
Okay, bye.
Passive Aggressive Income was written, recorded, edited, and produced by co-hosts and creators Mims and Lexie. We truly want to thank our listeners, collaborators, friends, and family that continuously support us for all the love we receive. If you enjoy our show, please give us a glowing rating and review on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Also, follow us on Facebook and Instagram to see what we are up to. For any inquiries, please email passiveaggressiveincome2023@gmail.com. Episodes of Passive Aggressive Income are available wherever you listen to podcasts, so make sure to subscribe and like us on your favorite streaming platform.